Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Adi Klevit here with the System Simplified podcast, where we interview top entrepreneurs, founders, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And this podcast is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group. At Business Success Consulting Group, we create custom processes and tailor-made business systems so businesses can thrive and grow. And today's guest is Ian Vacin. Hi, Ian.
Hello, how's it going?
Good. It's so great to have you on this podcast.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And Ian, you are the co-founder of Karbon with a K, which is a workflow software management for workflow management software for accounting companies. And I have several of my clients that use Karbon. They're very happy with it. And that's why I reached out. I said, okay, well, I see how it's actually helping my clients become more organized, put systems in their business. So that I wanted to talk to you to find out more about Karbon, share what Karbon is all about, but also hear your story. How it came about and why, and talk about systems in general, because I know you like systems. So, and you worked throughout your career of the last over 25 years, right? Experience in leadership in Intuit, Xero, now Karbon. You definitely have an experience in the industry and creating those systems. We're going to talk about systems for the financial industries, but it applies to any industry to having to have systems and why systems are important. So anything else you want to add in terms of the introduction that I left out?
No, I think the only thing to add, and the reason why I like systems so much, is I'm actually an industrial engineer by trade.
Like me?
And have a master's. Yeah, and a master's in engineering management. So for me, it's not just about the process per se, but it's also about all the other elements behind it that make it so that if you have a properly working set of systems, that you can ultimately get to whatever end goal that folks want.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, our listeners are going to listen to two industrial engineers talk about systems today. Amazing. Hopefully we didn't lose anyone to go, okay, this is like too much. No, we can definitely talk it in a language that everyone can understand. So that's great. Where did you go to school?
I went to school at UC Berkeley, and then I went to school at Northwestern for the master's. Nice.
Very nice. Okay. So how did you start Karbon? What's the story behind Karbon?
Karbon was when I was at Intuit. Prior to that, we had seen practice management products that we had worked with, and they didn't quite work. They just weren't able to do what they were supposed to do. When we were at Xero, we actually bought a practice management product, which was Workflow Max, which is now Xero Practice Manager. And at the time when we were leading Xero, we kept seeing that for accountancies, and actually it's anyone that's in the knowledge working space, we would go to their offices and watch them, and there'd be 5 people sitting right next to each other. And nobody knew when a client would call what the context or the history was, because it was isolated on each person's machine, usually in their inbox. And the problem that we were seeing was that there's a lot of communications that ultimately for knowledge work changes how the work needs to be done. And so the traditional systems were generally very rigid. You'd have a process that would be set. As soon as you talk to the client, it would ultimately change, and therefore it couldn't conform with those particular set patterns. But there was a standard set of operating procedures that generally the firm ran with. So you needed to have this consistency, but this flexibility that just didn't exist. And so Karbon was sketched out in a coffee shop between myself and the other 2 co-founders. And it was really just understanding that there's a close marriage between communications and work. And you have to have both of them running in sequence in order to make sure that you're able to deliver what needs to be delivered at the end of the day.
Absolutely. So it's consistency with flexibility. I like that, because you want to have systems to have consistency. I ask many people, many of my guests, my clients, what is it that, why systems? Why do you want systems? And one of the main answers that I get is consistency for purposes of being consistent and doing things over and over. But that's also why people don't like systems, because they feel like it will ruin their flexibility and they won't be able to actually create it will be too restricting. It will basically won't allow them to have the freedom that they want. So that's why I think when you mentioned the consistency with flexibility is so important, and having the communication aspect of it in place, it's super important. That's one of the reasons why I love industrial engineering. That's the reason why I became an industrial engineer, is because it really combined the scientific part with the people element, right? And that's where you, like you described, the consistency with flexibility or the consistency with communication. It's very, very important.
Yeah, I was going to say, before I did all the different jobs in the accounting profession, I used to work in the semiconductor realm. And so those systems are very rigid. You want them to be repeatable. They have to be the same. You're looking for Six Sigma. You want to make sure that everything is fully able to be replicated time and time again. But that's when you're producing goods. But when you're producing knowledge work, that flexibility has to be there. And so you need to have the constructs of what the process is going to be so that pattern's repeated. But every single client's going to have a different variation with that. And it might just vary, 5 to 15%, but you need to be able to capture that because they expect that high level of service. But you need that repeatability so that if you're passing the work between people or someone's going to help assist in any way, they understand the pattern where things are at, and all the contextual information is served up in the right way. That's what gets you that efficiency that you want.
Absolutely. It's funny because I started my career also in the semiconductor industry. And I remember when I was doing it, I was doing time study, right? And basically, a time study is when you literally have a stopwatch and you look at it, you make a study, the study of the different components of the flow line, and you want to know how much time people spend or the machine or whatever is being spent on a certain component in order to make it more efficient. And I remember very clearly of doing time study on the different lines with different people, and I could see it was very obvious that the human element was very, very a key component, because there was somebody there that was not working as fast as the other person. I mean, that person you could see maybe had, they weren't as alive or enthusiastic about what they were doing. And that is the component of it's like varies, as you said, it varies from task to task, communication to communication, skill set. There are a lot of components that can be just the machine itself, cannot be just the software. There has to be something else there as well. So completely agree. It's so funny.
One interesting aside on that is what we've seen over the thousands of firms that use it and the patterns that emerge. A lot of times, especially with accounting firms, where the process breaks and where it deviates from what was originally required or what was built, that actually is innovation. So what's happening at that point is the process didn't work. And so somebody is trying to make it conform to what they see as a regular pattern. And so we instruct a lot of the accounting firms we work with, look to where the product deviates from person to person, because somebody in there has figured out a more efficient way because they had to. And that is where that continuous process improvement exists. That doesn't necessarily exist when we're talking about semiconductor, but it does exist with knowledge work.
Absolutely, 100%. And that's finding the common denominator and where it deviates, which is, I agree. I thought maybe it would be good to actually talk more about the practice management software, that's what Karbon is, and other software that exists out there in terms of different software that we use in the business and how they interact, and when do you actually need a specific practice management software as opposed to using more generic tools, maybe task management tools like Asana, ClickUp, Monday. That's a question that I hear a lot. I mean, should I use task management or should I use a specific software management, like a specific management tool such as Karbon?
I think it really depends on the size, the maturity, and what you're trying to accomplish with your particular firm. So if you're a smaller accounting firm, for instance, or let's say you're a smaller business, you might find that whatever your core application is that you use. So for accountants, that would be either QuickBooks Online, Xero, one of the general ledger tools, because that's where they live and breathe every day. But if you're a marketing firm, it's going to be a marketing software. If you're a sales organization, it's going to be your sales tools, whatever that primary one is. Generally, when you're small, you only have the ability to absorb a couple of pieces of technology. But as you get bigger and bigger, then those requirements expand. The difference that's really emerged over the last 5 or so years is the requirements around vertical software as a service or verticalized software versus horizontal or general software. So, when you mentioned some of those tools, right? Like let's say we went with Monday or Notion or some of those other ones, they do a great job on managing the tasks themselves. But when you're dealing with the context of a particular vertical, in this case, like accounting, there are very specific needs and very specific tools that are being dealt with. And so Karbon's usually a product, or practice management is usually a product that folks get to when they've outgrown the basics that they can go. They usually go 3 to 4 people in size. They have aspirations for growth. The volume of the work starts to become quite a bit more. And they'll graduate from those either free tools or some of those non-specific ones. And so that's why if you look at I think the sign behind me, it's collaborative work management. And so you start to, as you get bigger, you need to have more specialized tools. And so for accountants, they need to bring their files into one place. They need to have the communications in one place. They need to have standard operating procedures. You need to be able to understand how your work is profitable. So you have to unfortunately manage time, and you've got to bill for it. And there's really 3 spheres of data that they're dealing with. It's the relationships, it's the financials, and it's the work. In some cases, they're small. You can solve all that maybe with QuickBooks Online. But as you get bigger, those 3 spheres separate. And so we live in the work sphere, and we then collaborate closely with the other 2. And that's where you see a lot of the feature build out that is defined as practice management.
Absolutely. So would you say that, so is Karbon also acting as a CRM?
It can. So smaller firms, there's a full, we like to call it contact management, because a CRM, by a classic definition, implies email, mass marketing, implies prospect and lead management. And so the term is generally used for enterprise companies on pipeline and those particular marketing capabilities. But for most firms, CRM is really a contact management system, ability to track all the different types of information you might have, and then to be able to take certain actions with that data. And so Karbon does do that, but we don't do those higher level features that you might find in other products like maybe HubSpot or Salesforce. And that's where, for us, we're a best of breed solution. So when you can't, you want to do those sorts of things, that's where our integrations and you'll see more and more of those come out. We have quite a bit right now, but that's where you want to pair those particular products together.
Yeah, and that brings a really good point in terms of, let's say we have listeners right now that are not maybe in the accounting arena, but I'm sure there are a lot that are. But regardless where you're at, you really have to define what is it that you want from the software, right? Because people can throw out, I need a CRM. Actually, it happened to me with a client that I was talking to with a client, now became a client, but when I was talking to them before they signed up, I would ask them, well, what do you use the CRM for? Because, the CRM for me, it would be like, I asked them, do you need an email campaign? Are you actually sending out emails, or are you automated follow-up, or you have campaigns there? No, they just use it just like what you said for contact. You have the contact and you just want a place to store it. So that's not really a CRM. You don't need a complex CRM to do that. Now, should you have a process on how to follow up on prospects and maybe automate it? Yes, but as you said, then there is the integration. But I think the point is to really define what are the uses that you want from each software, right? So and then not try, if that software does not have the capabilities, then you need to integrate. But if it does have the capabilities of what you want, don't just throw something like, it's easy to throw a name of this is what I need, but you don't really need that. So it's really depends on the maturity of and what are the needs. So I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, I don't know for folks if they have it, but it's not something, we draw out what is all the technology that a large firm would need. And we break it down into categories. The best thing is to look at something like that and then prioritize in that category. What are the things that are most important to you? What are the jobs that are to be done? And what are the prioritization of those jobs? If you do that, then you can see what is the technology that's most important to me? And then you can look at the complexity of your organization. You can look at your total cost of ownership, because you might have some constraints. And then you can start to go down that particular avenue to figure out, do I need something that's broader and more generic, that's going to tick a lot of boxes? or am I going to be more specialized and have that best of breed solution? So again, it's all a prioritization exercise, and it's all about thinking about, well, what is really going to move my business forward?
Absolutely. I love that idea of the diagram. So can you tell us a little bit, like what areas do you find for, let's say, a small, medium-sized business? What areas of technology they have to have that will really push them forward by having that technology?
So if we go outside that, just to generalize it, I'll put it more in the professional services space. You have to think about there's two really lenses that you're working with: that which you're working with a client, and that which you're working internally to get work done. The client side is all the services that you render, and there are usually purpose-built tools that solve that. So for accountants, they've got to do payroll, tax, bookkeeping, accounting, advisory, IT consulting. And almost every one of those products, there's a product that exists for each one of those buckets. And depending on the size of the firm, they can't do all those things. They might do a subset. So that's really important because that drives revenue. So you need to be able to choose those ones. On the other side of it, it's the internal side of the business that needs to function. On that side, you're looking at contact management or CRM. You're looking at time and billing, staffing. You're looking at history of communications. You're looking at workflow. You're looking at tasks. You're looking at document management, practice intelligence, or firm intelligence. And there's a list of those categories as well. And again, there might be certain solutions you use that are specific. The things that connect those two are your communications and collaboration layers. And that's where you might have internal communication tools like Slack or Teams. You might have external communication tools like Zoom or GoToMeeting or whatever it might be. And then you've got essentially a contact layer that goes between that, which is managing your clients and also managing the intelligence for those as well. And so it really goes across that spectrum. And it usually starts from the stuff that drives the revenue, which is on the left-hand side or the client side. And then it goes back to, well, how do I create and complete that work? And again, that prioritization is what's important to really see, do I need all the bits? Or again, which bits are the most important? And then compare vendors based on those prioritizations.
Absolutely. That makes total sense. At what point do you find that your clients signed up for Karbon? Like, what are the main pain points that they experience?
For us, usually when they hit 4 to 5 employees in size, the team dynamics that exist within a firm come into play. And it's because there's too much organization that's needed, and there's no visibility across all the work that's happening. Because in a 2 to 3 person, if you're by yourself, you essentially can use some pretty simple tools because everything's in your head, and you're gonna track it usually in one place. Once you get 2 or 3, you're still coordinating pretty closely. You're having regular meetings and discussions. You might be sitting side by side, but as soon as you hit that 5 mark, you've hit team dynamics where everyone's trying to run independently. And now you've got a contextual issue where information is being locked in certain places. And that's when folks usually come to us. Either they're anticipating that or they've hit that. And now they need something where they can collaborate and get one view. So we do use, and you'll like this, we use a Kanban board concept. The difference is that Kanban board, unlike other products like Trello, has all the depth of all the information that you need to be able to action whatever it might be. And again, that's the emails, that's the documents, that's the collaboration comments, that's the time, that's the process itself. And that's what's necessary when you're dealing with a high volume of repetitive work in a high communication setting. And that's what Karbon's really set up to solve.
Absolutely. And, because I work with businesses across industries, because what the common denominator is implementing systems and creating, documenting, implementing processes and procedures. I see different industries. And that is true also, even in an industry unrelated, such as construction. You can have a contractor that has a truck and they just do it, themselves, subcontracting, etc. They should have systems, but they need to basically build the organization, right? I mean, they need to then build the leads, build a customer base. And then when it happens, they have to hire people. So they hire another person. And pretty soon they need systems in order to manage. So they have to have whatever they, like a bidding software, for instance, to write the bids correctly. So they send it to the customer. So that would be an example, right? So that would be an example of an accountant using Xero or QuickBooks, or, a tax preparer will use a tax preparation software where you can actually prepare the taxes, right? So that would be the similarity here. But then you have to have the collaboration between the teams. You have to have basically make the experience for the customer very good in terms of like scheduling, sending the estimates. I'm talking about the contractor. So you schedule through the software that will schedule, that will actually, you will have to have a view of the entire schedule, that will send reminders maybe, that will allow to collaborate between the different project managers, that then if you become more complex, allow to manage the projects themselves, making sure they are on time, on budget, the cost, etc. So that it's similar in different industries, because a company will hit a point where the use of technology will actually, it's necessary for them to get to the next level and able to service and be profitable.
Yeah, and two things on that. One is, you brought up construction, for instance. So the issue with construction, it's long projects, complicated back and forth. And there's different things you need from like a work product. You need Gantt charting. You need to understand the dependency structure a bit more, which is different than accountancies. Law, if you go into the law field, it's case management, and it's about how the communications have to go between the two parties or multiple parties, and documents and document revisions are really important. So that's why these vertical particular products exist, because the integrations and the tools you use are different, and therefore there's only so much that each vendor particularly can do. And so that's why you generally want to stick with what's in your particular sector. There's a second piece that you brought up, though, which is really important, which is outside the technology, but something to think about. And you touched on it. When you're looking at any given business, you're looking at the set processes they use. So, standard operating procedures and a system of processes. What people forget is, when you're talking about industrial engineering and you're talking about processes, it's an art and a science. The science might be the steps to complete something, but the art is that every set of processes is wrapped by an experience. And so most people don't think about the fact that in the end of the day, especially in professional services, your client is who you're trying to impress and wow and provide a high level of service to, because they pay you and they'll pay you more with that experience. And so as people go through the processes, they think and they forget to include the client or the customer in the process to serve. And so generally when you build a process, you need to go back and think about, what are all the interaction points I have with my customer? What am I going to show them? How am I going to communicate with? How am I going to work with them? It's not just about getting some product out the door, but it's about bringing the client or customer along that journey and using the technology and the tools to allow for that interaction to occur, so that you're top of mind, you're present, and you're also making sure that you're doing service for them and they can also experience that.
100%. I so agree with you. It's that human element, right? So it's actually, I was working with a client that he has actually a car dealership, and we created a procedure on how to schedule an appointment, which was more like, okay, go to this screen and go to that screen and go do that and go do that. But what was missing was that human element. He's like, why would I go to that dealership as opposed to another? And for this one, they have a very specific method of really making their guests or clients feel very welcome. So that had to be integrated into that SOP. It's not enough to just press a button here or do this or say the words so we actually get the key so we can service the car. It was more the experience. So the client will always come back and refer others. And that is the value. So I agree with you. It's combining the how with the why and integrating it. And then, we can actually have how do we do that? But we do it in such a way that aligns with everything, with the core values, etc. So that's a very good point.
Generally, most companies have to focus or over-index on one of three different vectors. It's either operational efficiency, innovation, or service, customer service. And so most firms need to take an understanding of what is the core differentiator for them. For most firms, it's really going to be on service these days. But if it's operational excellence, then you don't necessarily need to worry about the experience, because you're trying to drive the cost as low as humanly possible, and you want to be the low-cost leader. And if you're on innovation, then you're a premium player. And what you're trying to do is not only wrap that experience, but you're trying to provide something that nobody else can. And if you're in the service realm, then it goes back to, you need to think about your customer experience in everything that you do to ensure that that's felt by the customer.
Absolutely. I agree. So Ian, what are some of the key KPIs that you see accounting companies keep in order to make sure that they are, meeting their goals? Well, what would be the scorecard?
It's interesting. We just wrapped up a 2-month-long survey to everyone that's in the Karbon database. So actually, I do have that relatively known. One of the first thing is the reason why folks come to us is because they want visibility across the work. But the reality is, if you dig below that, there's a couple of things they're trying to solve. They actually just want to know their bottlenecks, which is really funny to hear accountants tell us they want to know their bottlenecks, because as an industrial engineer, that makes me really happy. The second one was on a build out of that, they want to know their capacity so they can plan. So inside of the accounting world, it's a very seasonal business with really high ups in the work and downs. So you try to flatten it out when you're doing tax returns, because they come at you so quickly. So you try to use a lean production model for that. But with that, the modeling of the resource and the staffing is really important, because you have to do that 3 or even more now, 6 months beforehand, so you can prepare for the onslaught. The third one was really the profitability side of the client. And that's because, you're trying to shed the dead weight on your client list to make sure you're servicing the best ones with the most amount of attention. But there's a lot that draws a lot of the resources away. And why these ones come up is in the accounting profession. If you look at how the talent equation is, it's really, really tight. If you think in the other industries, it's hard to find workforce. It is extremely tough to do in the accounting world. It only, new people coming into the profession is about 0.5% per year. But right now we have a massive number of folks retiring from the profession. And so the labor shortage is getting tighter and tighter and tighter. And that's why looking at those particular metrics are so important, because the system itself, your way of doing work, is critical to try to squeeze as much as you can from the small amount of people that you have. And so we hear that people tell us, your practice management product is like having another staff member that we didn't have, because that's the type of efficiency we're able to get, so we can ultimately work as quickly as we can through the work that we have.
Absolutely. And I think also that's actually, you hit upon really important point in terms of the importance of having a practice management software is to also for employee retention, because when you have that, because that has been my experience when I'm going into an accounting firm, let's say we're doing a project to document or implement their processes, right? If they have such a software and they don't have such a software, it's such a big difference, because it makes they're more efficient, organized, and the employees, the people that work for them, or even the business owners themselves, they feel the stress is less. You are able to manage the stress. You are able to manage the workload. You will manage to collaborate. There is less friction, right? So that makes a better culture, a better environment to work at. So sometimes you don't think about it. You think about the client experience, right? And making sure that everything is efficient, but it's also the internal experience is so important by having a system that allows for collaboration and communication.
Yeah. And the thing that's interesting as I reflect on it is in most places, the work is done in a fragmented set of systems, which is just what it normally is. What a practice management or a work platform provides you is each person within the firm has ownership. They have control. They have the information they need. And in a lot of firms, unfortunately, there's a lot of micromanagement that happens because you don't have visibility across things. So you're constantly pestering people to understand where things are at, because at the end of the day, you have to meet with the customer and be able to explain what you've delivered and when you've delivered it, and is it on time, because there are negative ramifications for the work being late, incomplete, or not as it was spec'd out. And so that work platform becomes that freeing element so that people can take control of what they need to get done and ensure it's getting done without having someone breathing down their neck, asking constant questions of where it's at. So that visibility becomes that thing that both drives the person who's doing the work, but also the person who's overseeing maybe the client or the work overall.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And, it also helps the environment we live in right now in terms of like the change in the work environment. So it's not in person necessarily. It's more either hybrid or remote, especially for professional services that you do not need to meet with the client one-on-one in face to face. That's what I experienced. Is I've seen the difference, the changes throughout the last couple of years, and the need of having an actual good practice management software is so important, or a management, your workflow management software is so important, because that is also creates the visibility where the workers are remote.
Yeah, we saw this though, even in an in-person environment. Again, we talked about the fact that, I'm here, there's a couple of desks next to me. Generally, folks are working heads down trying to get work done, but they don't necessarily make the information come together. But with COVID, everything's been thrown upside down. It will settle back down to in-office settings and so forth will become more prevalent. But we're now in most cases a situation of 3x2, 3 days in, 2 days out. And so now you have this, even if you're 1 day out, you have a remote situation. And that's really changed for folks how they have to operate. And it's been a pretty big shock to folks across all industries. And so now it becomes even more important to have good data management and centralized systems, and then be able to have them working together, because it becomes so hard to find what you need. And again, I think search is the biggest thing that we see in terms of the tax people have, just trying to find the one piece of information you need to get a job done. And so the more that you can, bring that all together in a logical way, and then set the processes to make sure it's cultivated correctly, the better off you're going to be as a business.
Absolutely. Absolutely. How do you work in Karbon? Are you remote, or do you work in an office?
We've been remote essentially from day one. We do have offices where folks work together. So we have, in this one, we probably have 8 people. In other ones, we have up to 30 or 40, but most people work from home. And those that do have an office location near them, it's flexible when they want to come in. For engineers, it's generally prefer that they come in. They prefer to be separated and have that ability to collaborate. But as a company, we've always practiced what we preach. We use the product internally as well. So we have to operate in that same sort of paradigm. And the keys that we found is, again, document everything, because it helps your neighbor and your colleagues, and to automate behind yourself. Be diligent, and when you're in a remote environment, over communicate, because you need to be able to make sure people understand the context. If anything is going back and forth, people get really short in their commentary on collaboration platforms. Pick up a phone, talk to somebody. It gets out of control pretty quick, and you can't sense somebody's feelings. And then make sure that you have a defined process by which to do what you need to do. And if it needs to change, make the changes for it, and then communicate as such. Those have been things that have helped us overall in terms of navigating it for the last 8 years, where we've been living in this full remote situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you do for culture? How do you build culture when you have a remote team?
So we try to get the team together. It was harder in COVID, right? Because you couldn't get the team together, but we generally would bring the teams together departmentally once a quarter. We try to do that half every 6 months, do it as a collective regional. And then we want to get back to the point where we could do it as an entire organization once a year. The thing that was actually the most important for culture was from the, culture is not defined by a person. It's actually absorbed and cultivated by the entire team. The critical thing is to make sure that you're hiring folks that match the culture, that embody the culture and can help build the culture. And that's hard. You have to be patient, and you say no a lot. So we have a policy here that if it's not a heck yes by everybody that's interviewing, it's no. It has to meet that high standard. The second piece of it is, especially in a remote work, you have to have standard operating rhythms that you operate. Every 2 weeks, we have our team meeting. It's at the same time. Every departmental meeting happens at the same time on a weekly or fortnightly basis. And then when we have teams that are spanning across the globe, we flip-flop those meetings every week to happen at times that are amenable to that particular geography. So we try to balance it, because it becomes off weight and people get frustrated. And we do a lot of one-on-ones. A lot of my time is spent meeting with the entire staff up and down, because we really want to drive their careers. We want to help them get to wherever they want to go. It might not be here at Karbon. We're okay with that. We want to be able to cheer for them on the sidelines if they go elsewhere. But it's about being very thoughtful on what they do. And you've got to spend the time to really understand your staff and be able to empower them. And that necessarily isn't followed by a lot of firms, surprisingly enough. And so it's really being mindful and thoughtful, and actually investing the effort to really care. And that really helps in terms of allowing for that team to then be able to take the culture further and in a more positive way.
Absolutely. I agree. And then, on top of it, having the technology, like you said, you have that you use what you preach. So it's using that technology, having that workflow or your own vertical managing the work, having a software that manages that work is very important, because then you are able to have a platform where you can manage work, you can collaborate, there is transparency and visibility. So that's definitely also a key ingredient to having a successful remote team. That's great. So Ian, what's the future of Karbon?
It's funny because I look back, it's been 8 years now, and I think we're just beginning. It took us a while to get where we're at, and what held true when we started, it still holds true today in terms of what problems we were trying to solve and how we were trying to solve it. And now we're blessed with the fact that we don't have as much of a scrappy team. We have the great people here and a great number of them that we didn't have before. And so a lot of the different pieces that we want to build out and make them more impactful, we're able to do. From a technology standpoint, the thing that actually makes me the most excited is we've already embarked on 2 major different projects that I think will fundamentally change how our customers, which are accountants, but it's actually, you're seeing this in other areas as well. One is we're spending a lot of time on what we call practice intelligence, which is being able to take all the data that we're able to collect and gather, so we know when what someone's doing as they're going through the product, but then pairing that and moving it out into a uniform platform where it can be married with the financial data that folks are operating within, as well as the relationship data. So we talked about that. And so the technology didn't really exist before, but now we can do things where that data can be overlaid together, placed into a data repository that can be controlled by a customer, and then they can put in a sort of reporting platform on top of it, and they can determine what do they want to measure, how do they want to see information. Because when someone like me as a vendor does that, I can solve it for 10, 20% of folks, but it misses the mark for the majority, and it's very limiting. So that ability to free that information up and provide it to others and be a steward of the data, not an owner of the data, is a new change of where we're at. And the second piece is we're working pretty heavily on what we call integrated workflow objects. And that is the ability for a product like ours to be able to transcend with other technology out there. It might be, you mentioned CRM, it might be pricing software, it might be capacity planning software. But workflow isn't necessarily contained to a singular product. It spans products. And so we aren't necessarily the owner of the workflow that spans, but we have to be a component in it. And so we're creating technology that allows for a workflow to be defined across many systems, and that data to be able to move across, and control of that within our own app can be controlled from outside from other applications as well. And that's where I think the change of what's going to happen and that sort of next level of efficiency for businesses will be at, because you can understand what, maybe it's just onboarding a customer. You mentioned it's one of the most complicated processes. It generally touches 3 to 5 different systems. But when they're not working in tandem, which is the case today, it becomes very, very haphazard and quite slow. But when those are able to flow quite quickly and smoothly, and everyone's a steward in that path, you ultimately get some pretty good magic. And that's where we're headed towards.
I think it's great. Because, the dream is always to have one software that will do it all, right? But that will be like somebody, it costs a lot of money to do that majority of the businesses are not going to be able to invest. And it's also can become antiquated very quick because it has to be supported, right? But taking those different components and not having that feeling, oh, well, it's another software I have to log into, right? Because they don't talk to each other, but actually having that is the best of both worlds, because you can have software that are already dedicated, like, you have a team that is dedicated to Karbon, right? So we know that it's always going to be up to date. It's always going to move forward. It's always going to be, I don't have to do anything about it. I can have my CRM, if I truly want to do a marketing campaign, I can have my human resource management system, right? So I can have everything communicate one to another. Then it gives that apparency of one system, but you can still have the different components and they talk to each other. So I think that's brilliant, because that will just allow businesses to run more efficiently and just comes down to communication. So everything communicates to each other, including the systems, not just the people.
Yeah, and that's where I think the word practice management to take a light of is, in order for a best of breed architecture to exist, each one of those vendors needs to build just enough that is in conflict with who they're integrating with. It has to have overlapping functionality. Mm-hmm. And so practice management has legs to all these different other elements that other systems do as well. And so if we talk about, CRM, the reason why I said we have a contact management system, well, it's in replication to what might be in the CRM, but they have functionality that we'll never build. When I wake up every day, I think about how do I build the best work system possible, but I don't think about building the best CRM system possible. But we have to build just enough so that those integrations can magically work. And that's why you see that sort of spread. But we compete against folks who believe in the suite concept, and they're going to deliver everything to you, and they're going to put it in one package price. And the problem with that is every day they wake up, they have about 50 problems they're trying to solve, and they can't solve them all. So what happens is you get a lot of functionality and none of it works the way you want it to. And you think that it integrates tightly and it doesn't. So it falls pretty flat, but you're paying a high price point. And so that's kind of the advent of where we're at now, which is verticalized products to serve exactly what you want, right-sized products that are best of breed, that are coming together, and the technology then, and the vendors you should choose should be, again, ones that are able to bring that together and share that information across the tools that you want.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Ian, you shared so much information here, and it's been a great podcast. I mean, I enjoyed it. I definitely talking to another industry engineer is always fun, but you definitely, you embrace those systems. You understand why businesses need systems, but not only do you understand it, but you also do something about it, which is amazing. So thank you so much for being a guest.
Appreciate it. Thank you for having me today.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.